With the combine coming up next week, we turn our attentions to the draft, and we turn our attention to the draft. We put a call out to our guy, Ian Cummings from ProFootballNetwork.com. We like to say around here it's Howie season when the season becomes about player evaluation and roster building. It's Ian Cummings season too, because the combine coming up next week. You've been putting in hours and hours and hours of film work and going to all-star games and the like. Is the combine more of a let me cement my opinions? Is it still more of a fact-finding mission? How do you, as a talent evaluator for the draft, look at the combine?
Yeah, first off, great to be back with you guys here. For the combine, I think it's more of a cross-checking exercise, right? Usually when you watch the tape, you're not very surprised with the results that come on. More athletic guys are going to look more athletic on tape. I think usually there is a positive correlation with that. So really the combine for me is cross-checking and, making sure guys test what they're expected to. If they run a little bit faster, now you go back to the tape and it's like, all right, is that a technique issue where he's not gleaning that speed on tape? Is there something you can do to maximize that functional athleticism? Or if he runs a little bit slower, is his game pace faster than his testing pace, right? So it's all about cross-checking and finding true north, right? It's not something where my rankings are going to be too elastic. I'm largely set by the film grade, but I think the combine testing portion is really good for just cross-checking and kind of settling things. And then for the field positional drills too, just seeing how guys move in space in person, right? Getting a feel for that too. I think it's more for just kind of covering all your bases.
Ian, good to see you. Excited. Ian Cummings season here. One of the best draft guys in the business. Appreciate you. So I wanted to say that right off the bat. But I always ask to start, number one, I want to know deepest positions and from your perspective, and also that shelf when you have the blue chippers and then it drops off a little bit. Where do you have that this year amongst the top players?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a little bit deeper, the shelf wise. I think last year, blue chip players, there was maybe 4 or 5 for me, and then it dropped off a little bit. This year, I think you're getting close to a dozen blue chip guys. So it's a fun class. And then even after that, too, you have a lot of guys who are kind of in that 8.5 to 8.99 range for me, which is still an impact player, right? So I think it's a lot deeper at the top end, right? There's a little bit of a drop off kind of in the mid to late day 2 range, but there's still a lot of depth there too. And then we see in the day 3 range a little bit of a drop off as well. But I think if you need top end talent this year, a lot of blue chip guys and a lot of impact players too. So I think there's a lot of depth there. Deepest position, there are a few in contention for me. Wide receiver is probably the top one though. I think wide receiver, the depth all through the class, a lot of variance in the profiles that you have. I would say cornerback is another one too. And I know that's a good
cornerback. Whoa, Johnny Mac just told me cornerback. You got 2 guys who are worth the top 22 picks.
Now, I said two are going to be gone, I said, which is Arnold and Quinn Mitchell from Toledo. We're talking the Eagles, 22. Then you're going to have guys like Rakestraw. Is that how you pronounce his name? Rakestraw. Rakestraw.
Yep.
Rakestraw, you have the kid from Iowa. And you have Wiggins, who might those guys, if you're sticking at 22, they might be there. They might not be there. But we were talking about tackles. You got that top. There's like 8 tackles that are freaking going to be right. It's unbelievable how many. So who do you have number 1? Most people, because he's the safest pick, probably is Alt. But all those guys, and even down to Amarius Mims from Georgia, to me, he's the most talented, but he's barely played. He scares me. That's what I'm concerned with, because I think he's started 8 games total in his career. Eagles are known to go with Georgia players recently. He scares me a little bit just because, but he might have the biggest upside. There's so many tackles in that range. You're almost going to have to get value at the position. That's my argument.
Yeah, the tackle class is really strong at the top. I think, it's weird. I don't think upside is a major separator for a lot of these guys, because Joe often gets billed as the higher floor player, but I think he's a very, very good functional athlete with really good flexibility and recovery capacity. And I think that's one of his central traits. So for me, it's not really an upside separator, because all of these guys are so talented. You look at Olu Fashanu, right? The athleticism with him, the explosiveness, the recovery capacity, right? The ability to stay square and play synergetic. Taliese Fuaga from Oregon State. That dude is explosive explosive attacking in space, absolute mauler. JC Latham, who I think is pretty athletic for his size too, a little bit more, blocky, a little bit clunkier than some of these guys, but still very powerful, very explosive, moving vertically off the line. And then Amarius Mims, you mentioned it. I think for Mims, the thing that gives me solace with him is that in such a small sample size, he has shown that he can play the left and the right side. He can switch around a little bit. And I think some of the bedrock building blocks for an offensive tackle, you talk about getting balance off the snap, getting depth out of your kick, right? Acquiring and maintaining leverage and pad level. I think those things are actually pretty strong for such a young player. I think he's very good at acquiring leverage, maintaining balance, staying square, placing his punches. I think there is room to improve his hand usage, right? And kind of combative independence after his initial extensions. But I think from what we've seen, I think the biggest question for me is probably the durability, because he missed some time with the ankle injury. And there were a few games this past year where he had to leave for a little bit. He got banged up, came back in. So I want to see if he can play consistently 17-game season. But I think the talent is absolutely very, very compelling at the top of the board. And then you got guys like Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma as well, which flexibility, leverage acquisition, those are some very strong points for him too. So for the Eagles in particular, if you're thinking about a future-minded right tackle pick, we know it's the kind of pick they like to make, and I think there's some candidates for them.
All right. We know, I see I've got your latest mock draft in front of me, which everybody loves a mock draft. Everybody wants a mock draft. Everybody wants you to affix a guy to a team. All it takes is one major deal that you didn't see coming, and then the dominoes start to fall. And throws your mock draft right out the window. So I'm going to cut you a ton of slack for that. Not even going to begin to question you. But you have your individual rankings. Player rankings, not as per position, not tied to a team or not anything else. How many tackles do you have in the top 22?
In the top 22, I know I have Alt, Fashanu, Buaga, Mims, and Latham. I
all
think
in
Guyton,
the top 22.
Those are all in the top 22. Yeah,
So
and then
John's
Guyton,
right.
Guyton
You've got 5 tackles in the top 22.
Mm-hmm.
There should be 8 if you just went by top prospects available. I think
there are a lot.
Should be 8, but there won't be. That's my whole point.
That's why I asked him, because I wanted his ranking. You got 8 in your top 22, John?
Yeah. It just as overall prospects, not
right,
they're going in the top 22.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many. It's absurd. But we know people are going to get pushed up the board at other positions, most notably, and people like to talk about quarterbacks. Obviously, the Eagles aren't going to go with quarterback or early in the draft, but one guy that I put in that category is JJ McCarthy, who is an interesting. Obviously, the top 3 guys are going. They might go 1, 2, 3. But JJ McCarthy, I mean, it scares me. On the other hand, I shouldn't blame it on him. It's just the way Michigan played. They were very successful. They won a national championship, but he didn't ask him to do anything. So to me, he's a complete projection almost at the NFL level. Obviously, he's got a lot of talent, but how much does that hurt your evaluation, or how much more difficult does it make your evaluation of a player like JJ McCarthy, who I think you had going 5th, if I recall, at one point? I would be scared to take him at 5th. I think you had him going. You had Kwesi trading up for him. I believe that because he makes a lot of bad decisions. But yeah, I mean, that guy. I don't know. I'm a little frightened. It's not his fault, but I'm a little frightened by the evaluation.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. And I think for me, there's always a few select principles that elevate, kind of, magnify a QB stock, right? If he's young, if he's talented, if he's a winner, right? You hear those cliches, but they do tend to move guys off the board, right? And you look at JJ McCarthy, he is still just 21 years old. He is very talented. He's got a very loose, elastic arm. He is very athletic, right? So to your point, I completely agree with you. I think the reservations are there because I think I really wanted to see him improve his poise in the pocket, his independent processing, his DB manipulation, right? All of those things in the multitasking with the pocket movement and the field processing and manipulation. And we saw good flashes of it early in the year, but like you said, a lot of people made the same observation in those games down the stretch, those really high profile, consequential games. They didn't ask him to do much. They didn't put a ton on his back. He wasn't often asked to elevate that offense. So now you wonder, we're taking this guy with top 5 capital. Can he elevate the offense when we need him to at the NFL level? That's still a question that we've left unanswered. So I think for NFL teams, it's really going to come down to getting with him one-on-one in the interview room and figuring out this guy, is he the character fit that we want? Does he have the mental acuity to sustain growth at the NFL level and build off of this physical foundation? Because the foundation is absolutely there, right? So I think for NFL teams, scarcity is such an accelerant too. Supply and demand, simple economics. I mean, it's just, it happens every year. We see guys after that drop off, if you're confident in this player's potential, he is still 21 years old. He does have the physical tools to be an impact starter. If all it takes is the character to kind of solidify that and say, we're willing to invest in this player. And for Minnesota in particular, they have a good offensive line. They have good weapons, right? I think the coaching staff is there to insulate his growth as well. So you ask yourself, do we have the pieces in place to get him to where he can be? And then it becomes an issue of, yes, we're willing to take that. It's a risk, and it's not a risk that I'm 100% sure I would take personally, especially moving up to get him. But he's young, he's talented. Those things are always accelerants.
And when you said he's just 21, my first mental response was, yeah, they're all just 21. What the hell are you talking about?
No, there's a lot of older prospects.
Michael Penix, not 21. Bo Nix, not 21. And those are the guys he's going to be compared against. So you're right to say just 21. All right, I'm going back to your list again. Power ranking, not positional, not need, not a draft mock, just ranking of the players. What's the first guard you got on your list?
The first, okay, well, there's the caveat here. The first player who can play guard is Jackson Powers-Johnson. He's in my top 20, but I would prefer to keep him at center just because he already has very good tape at center. He dominated the Senior Bowl, but his final year too, I mean, he won the Remington Award in every week. High IQ, high talent, physicality. So he's my top player who can play guard. My top player who I have listed at guard is Graham Barton. Now, he's in my early 30s range. I would prefer to play him at guard, but he can play tackle, center, the whole works. And my top pure guard is Christian Haynes, who's just a little bit behind Barton. Christian Haynes from UConn, another very explosive, tenacious player with the finishing torque. So in this class, you have a lot of varying molds. You have guys who could project there, and you have a few guys who have played there succinctly and will play there. We know that. But I think the moving parts, it will complicate it a little bit. But for the Eagles in particular, I think that's kind of what you're looking at. If JPJ is there and you want to play him at guard, that's a possibility. But for me, I look at those 2 second-round picks that you have in Philadelphia. I would much rather play that value proposition and try and get a guy like Christian Haynes or maybe Cooper Beebe.
Daniel Jeremiah, let's go back to corners because Jody brought that up before, but he had his pre-combine conference call yesterday. He mentioned he had about 14, I think he said 14, 15 corners with at least day 2 grades, which is pretty deep, as you mentioned. But he also said after that top group, it's mainly inside guys, mainly slot guys. Do you see it the same way? And those guys are valuable, and the Eagles could use a slot corner because Avonte Maddox has had significant injury issues over the past couple seasons, but it's not somebody you want to take at the top of the draft, an inside corner. So do you see anybody, how deep do you see the outside corners? I think that's the key.
I do agree. I think the depth drops off a little bit with the outside corner class after that top 15. I still think there are options in the later rounds. I'll throw out a couple. Jarius Monroe from Tulane is one that I like a lot, 6'2", 205. Very explosive, competitive, had a great Shrine Bowl, and he can play safety too. They've been projecting him there.
What round do you think he's going to go in? Because I got him written down here. It's one of the guys I was going to specifically ask you about, and you jumped to him immediately. Thank you for that. What round do you think he goes?
It's tough because he was an NFL Combine snub. I expected him to be invited to the Combine, and that was kind of a surprising development. But I think, he's going to have a pro day. He's going to test. I expect him to test well. My gut feeling would probably be round 6, round 5, maybe round 5, but I think 5 to 7. I think good players fall sometimes, and without the NFL Combine invite, that may be kind of a reflection of where they feel he's placed. But I think he's undervalued. I think he'll be. And we saw last year, like guys that I liked a lot. Corey Trice went to Pittsburgh in round 7. Jalen Jones went to Indianapolis in round 7 and ended up actually starting a few games in his rookie season, playing well. Carrington Valentine went to the Packers in round 7 and I think started half the year and actually played pretty well for a rookie. So I think good players fall. So it's kind of an inexact science, but I think round 5 to 7 is where I'd have him.
Thank you.
Edge rusher, that's another potential spot. The Eagles are going through some things contract-wise with Hassan Reddick, and they don't have enough depth even if Reddick comes back. How deep is that group? And if you start looking, I guess Dallas Turner, Jared Verse would be at the top. It's tough to imagine them dropping to the 20 22 area. Anybody in that range, Eagles fans should keep an eye on.
Yeah, if you want an edge at 22, yeah, I'm not confident Dallas Turner falls that far. I think there's some variance across the consensus where he's ranked. He's my edge one personally, but I think the upside is superlative with him. You know, you're not getting a ceiling like that. But Laiatu Latu, if he's there, is one that I would circle. I think him, you know, his pass rush bag, you know, his arsenal of moves is so deep and so complex. And then at 6'5", 260, he's got very good bend capacity too. So he can use that to finish reps while winning hand battles. So I like his pass rush upside a lot. So if he's there at 22, could be an option for them. I think it's definitely pretty well stocked at the top of the board, but I think especially for the Eagles, right? Hassan Reddick, if he leaves, you're probably looking for a speed rusher to replace him, right? So I think in guys who, you know, have some of that speed and bend, maybe a little undersized, but can still run the arc and stress angles against offensive tackles. A few guys within that mold that I look at, and these are kind of day 2, day 3 guys. But Jonah Ellis from Utah was a very productive pass rusher at the collegiate level this past year. I think he had 12 sacks and 16 TFLs, I think. But, you know, 6'2", 250, really good proportional length, really good bag of moves, and he's explosive, bendy, twitchy. Javon Solomon, who played at the Senior Bowl and had some nice reps, 6'1", around 250, but he's got 34-inch arms, so he's well leveraged. He's got great proportional length, can get inside your frame, drive power, but also run the arc. And then Mohamed Kamara is an absolute technician who's kind of within that similar mold too. He's probably a mid to late day 3 guy. But I think for the Eagles, if you're looking for a speed, bend rusher, a pass rush specialist, there are some options for you kind of in that value range.
All right. And oh, by the way, Jared Verse, Albany, great team, tough. That's why I'm opening former alma mater before he said, yeah, I could play on a higher level. Let me go to Florida State rather than little old Albany. But I'll be rooting for the kid on draft night. Safeties. Again, targeting first round and or second round. Eagles have 2 picks in the second round. Is this a good safety draft? If they don't take one in the first of all, is there one worthy going of 22? And if not, in that second round, is that a position where maybe a pretty good safety, a safety who can step in and play year 1, gets pushed down to the board to late in the second round where the Eagles pick?
Yeah, I would say there's one who's worthy of going to round 1 at 22, but it's a caveat because he played corner in college football. Cooper DeJean from Iowa.
Cooper,
you know,
yeah.
I think he projects very well at the safety. I think you could keep him at corner in a cover 3 scheme where he's asked to play more side saddle, right, playing with his eyes to the ball. But I think it's safety because he's 6'1", 209. He's already got a safety frame, and watching him play in support, he's very physical, very good at combating and deconstructing blocks. And then in coverage, right? I mean, this dude is such a good processor, so instinctive, such a high IQ football player with that route recognition, the closing speed, the ball skills. I think you can play him in a number of different spots, and that's why in a Vic Fangio defense, it would be so fun to watch him play because he's aggressive, he flies to the ball, he's explosive, rangy, and you know he's got the football IQ and the eyes to play all across the line. So I'm a big fan of him. I think for the Eagles, if you have a need at CB and safety, he can kind of blend the line between that. But if you pass on him in round 1, you know, if you decide to trade back, Tyler Nubin from Minnesota is a guy that's in my top 30. So I think he's a very solid football player. Doesn't quite have the center fielder range, but you know, in 2 high, he can play single high because he is so instinctive. And then he's 6'2", 205, so really good support presence, very good ball skills. My sweet spot for the Eagles is, again, that 50-53 range with those 2 second-round picks. I think there's a good chance that you could get one of Bo Braid or Cameron Kinchens. Bo Braid from Maryland, Cameron Kinchens from Miami. They're different stylistic players. Kinchens is definitely that center fielder, right? 5'11", 208. But he has that range. He has sideline-to-sideline speed. He's very good at undercutting passes. He's got the vision to make plays on the ball. And he's pretty good in support, too. I think with him, there are some lapses in coverage sometimes where his vision will get a little bit tied up. Sometimes he doesn't carry guys when he's supposed to. I think Bo Braid is the more consistent football player right now. He's not as rangy in single high, but you can play him in 2 high in the slot. He's so physical coming downhill. He's an incredibly twitched up, energetic player, combats blocks. He attacks offensive linemen and wide receivers in space even, and he's very good at making tackles, right? So Bo Braid, to me, is the better playmaker, the better 2-phase playmaker. But I think Cameron Kinchens, if you're looking for a ball hawk who can actually generate turnovers, that's it. So I think some different flavors there, but those 2 guys are very high. Bo Braid in particular, I think they'll be a phenomenal pick, 50-53.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Bo Braid recently. That's going to put an asterisk on him, name to keep an eye on. Going to give you a specific spot, which you should never do in the draft, but what the heck, we're doing a show. Eagles need a running back. They might bring DeAndre Swift back. Most likely not. And they'll need some kind of lead back. So they're not going to take one early, and there's no Bijan Robinsons in this draft. I'm even going to eliminate those second-round picks and talk about it's going to be about 97, right, Jody? What was the prediction?
Yeah, that's
97?
what they're projecting for the comp
projecting
pick, right?
97, the comp pick at the end of the third round. Can you find me a contributor right off the bat at 97 with a running back?
Yeah, and I think it depends on what mold you're looking for because there are a few guys who I think can take volume, but maybe don't have the top end mass. But there are a few guys who are absolute bowling balls too, can take volume, maybe not as much versatility in the passing game. But I think you have a contrasting molds for sure. So a few names I'll throw out there, try to cover all the bases here. Bucky Irving, if he's there from Oregon, big fan of his play style. He's an absolute catalyst, explosive, twitchy, high energy player with really good vision in congested areas, very good receiving ability too. Will Shipley from Clemson. This guy is very versatile. He's a guy who can run routes out of the backfield or even go into the slot, but he's around 5'11", 210. Very fluid runner, I should say. He's got very good hip flexibility in between the tackles, and that allows him to sift through those narrow lanes. He's got very good vision as well. Injuries were a concern this past year, but if he can stay healthy, I really like Will Shipley. He's a very good, multifaceted player. Marshawn Lloyd from USC. I think is a very underrated player. I think medicals will be big for him too, but he's around 5'9", 215. So he's got that density for you. But at the same time, he's one of the most agile, shifty runners in this entire class. Very explosive in space, very good receiving back as well. So I think if you can get past the medicals, Marshawn Lloyd might have the better mix of volume, size, and density, but also evasiveness within tight spaces. So I like him a lot too. And then one more that I will throw out there, Audric Estime, if you're looking for a volume guy, right? That dude is 5'11", 227. So he's the bowling ball, but he's got very good forward pressing physicality, very explosive too. You don't often think about the vertical speed with him because he is so big, but when he has a crease, he gets through it, and all of a sudden he's a freight train carrying a lot of momentum and force, and that allows him to finish forward very consistently. So a few guys at RB who I think could provide optimal value. One more name I'll throw out there. I think he might go within that gap between the 97th and the 160th pick. So if you're the Eagles, you might have to move around a little bit to get optimal value. But Dylan Lobby from New Hampshire, I think is a very, very good sleeper in this class. 5'9.5", 210 pounds. So he's a dense guy too. And he really showed out the Senior Bowl, but he's an elite receiving back. He's another one who can run routes out of the backfield, who can play a slot receiver essentially too. His route running is so detailed and nuanced, the footwork, the pacing that he brings, and he's a very good catcher too, but he's also very explosive. When you watch FCS players, you want their physical traits, if they're a legitimate prospect, you want their physical traits to stand above a little bit, and Dylan Lobby definitely does. He is an accelerator who can create space with his vertical athleticism, but he's also very good at weaving through first and second level lanes. So a lot of talent, I think, in that 97 to 160 range for the Eagles. So if they want to move around a little bit, I think they can work the board and get the running back who's best for them.
All right, I'll go even more specific. A player who I liked coming into the season, unfortunately got hurt, missed as many games as he played, but I still love the talent. I was leaning toward him coming into the year as a potential guy to fill a role for the Eagles. That would be wide receiver 3. See you, Quez. Jalen McMillan of Washington, who unfortunately went down with an injury in September, and I don't think he came back till either late October, early November. He missed 4 or 5 weeks, 4, 5 or 6 weeks. Just love his talent. He brings the same thing Quez does, just pure speed, bringing the top off the defense. Oh, by the way, he catches the football. How much did the injury hurt his draft potential as to where he's going to land, and where do you think it sits by the time we get to April?
I'm glad you asked about him, and if I remember correctly, on a radio spot we had, I think you asked me about him then too. So I think
that proves I'm not lying. I've been asking about him since September, even before he got hurt. And I'm just hoping that the injury actually drops his draft stats a little bit, so he makes him more viable for the Eagles.
Yeah, my stance is if he's fully healthy at the NFL Combine, he's going to help some people remember about him when he runs because he's got that vertical speed, right? He's a highly touted recruit. That talent is absolutely there. And I think, another thing with him, he's not just a speed guy. He can catch passes, like you said, but even then, he's one of the best route runners in this class, I think. When you talk about the hinge flexibility, the footwork at stems, the ability to cut sharp angles and leave DBs in the lurch. I think he's a very complete football player with that vertical pressing speed. So he's actually a top 75 prospect for me. He's a top 15
top
receiver.
75?
Yeah, so I would take him in that day 2 range. I like him a lot, and I think that, he's a little slept on, but hopefully that'll change at the NFL Combine as long as he can test. I'm a big fan. And I think particularly for the Eagles, if you're looking for that wide receiver 3, he is that perfect blend of speed, separation ability, and strong hands.
But if you're right, he's top 75. The Eagles aren't taking him. They're not going to use not going to use one of their top 3 picks on a wide receiver 3. I would think about it, but they're not. Would be my speculation.
There is a chance that he gets flagged medically because he had trouble staying healthy. His frame is a little leaner, so maybe he falls a bit. I never want to speak in absolutes because the board, there's always a number of ways it can fall.
Yeah. A couple things DJ said yesterday that interested me, Ian, just philosophy type things. One was at the top of the draft because I kind of thought I'm a little different than most. Most have Caleb, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. I would say I'm a Jaden Daniels. I love Jaden Daniels, but I just think he's going to be a superstar. I got kind of spooked by Caleb Williams, which isn't fair, because of that Notre Dame game. It was so bad. I can't get it out of my head. And I'm like, man, if you're that top level of a prospect, how do you have that? I should say it's just an outlier. But Daniel brought up a point that, Patrick Mahomes got knocked down a bit back in the day because he was always chasing points because he had a terrible defense. And, you take more chances and you make more mistakes. And same thing happened to Caleb Williams with USC, which had a terrible defense. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's a really nuanced discussion because I do think there needs to be a balance of holding a prospect accountable for things he can improve, but also acknowledging the factors that were working against them. I think sometimes it can go both ways, right? Some people are like, oh, what he's bad at, we can fix it. It's fine, right? You don't want to turn a blind eye to those things, but you do, like you said, want to acknowledge the circumstances that he's working under. And I think for Caleb Williams, there were a lot of games where he was being asked to really put the pedal on the metal and press down hard and get his team back in the mix, right? And sometimes that big play hunting came because of that. Now, the Notre Dame game early on, like his collapse in that game started early on. It was the first half. They were not behind by too much. It was a lot of, digging a hole for himself, throwing 3 interceptions in the first half. And at the very end of the half too, a play where, hey, it's not third down. You can take the next play, and forcing the ball into a tight window, didn't see the underneath defender. So there were times where that habit kind of comes back to a fault and takes over, right? So, I think there's a balance where you need to hold them accountable, but also understand there's a lot of good on the tape, right? So it's not something that makes him a liability in any stretch. It's just something that you want to see him cut down at the NFL level. And looking at how he'll project to an NFL team, odds are the defense is going to be that bad. You can't speak for, absolutes again, but, the odds are he's going to be working with a little bit better situation supporting on both sides of the ball. So I'm hoping that will improve. But at the same time, those traits that make him so chaotic at times are also what make him special. He does have that ability to create when nothing is there. The play is never over with him because of that change of direction, arm elasticity, vision in close quarters. So, I think for him, it's a balance, understanding that there is room to improve, but also prospects can have bad games. It's okay, right? They can have bad games. It's part of the full picture, and you ultimately want to project what they can be. And I think it all goes into that.
I'm going to ask you a specific question about your work leading up to the draft, starting back in the college football regular season, about Jaden Daniels.
Yeah.
And I'll take a little bit of a victory lap here. I had him winning the Heisman before any other national guy I know. He had a couple of games in October that I said, are you seeing what's going on here? I know Caleb Williams supposed to be a lock for the Heisman. Are you watching what this kid is doing down at LSU? So acknowledge for just that 1 year that I thought he could get the Heisman. But how many guys? When was the first mock draft you put out? Was it the day after last year's draft? I won't even count that one. I'll count from September on. When was the first mock draft you put out?
I got to go back and check, man. I know I wrote one a month from September, October, November. So I wrote one a month. So
okay, I believe you. I trust you. Where do you have Jaden Daniels going in your September mock? Do you remember off the top of your head? You want to take a general poke and hope at it?
I do remember there was one mock I did where I had him going to the 49ers in round 2. So for me, it was a corrective process where, coming into the year in the summer, this guy, he had talent, right? And he improved his efficiency last year, but he was still growing as that creator. And I think this year it really came together with him having the confidence to be that big play generator in both phases, right? It really clicked for him this year. I still think as a passer, there are areas where he can improve. Not an NFL level anticipator right now, and that bumps him a little bit down on my board. I also think the arm talent isn't quite at the level of the Caleb Williams or Drake May, but he is a guy who is that hyper elite creator. The athleticism for his size, the speed is incredible. A little bit leaner, and sometimes he'll take some hits that he probably shouldn't take, right? He's a very good competitor, and sometimes they can play against him. But again, the speed, the agility, the creative potential is near unmatched with him. And then he is a good quick game thrower who is accurate, right? So, I think there's a lot to like. And I think for me, it was a little bit of an acclimation, not an acclimation process, but a correction process where you see he's playing well. All right, let's go back to the grade book, put in some new numbers, and where does he file in now? And then I think it was around October that I was like, October, November, where you're starting to kind of be honest with yourself, like, hey, this guy's a first-round passer, right? It's just where does he rank? So there's always a little bit of a process because you are covering so many bases and watching so many guys mid-season. But you eventually you're honest with yourself, and you have to address this on the tape and see what you see.
Knowing you, I knew you'd take it that way. You'd take it as, I had to make a change. I had to revamp it. I guarantee you,
everybody did.
I guarantee you there were other guys that had him in the 6th round. If you had him in the 2nd round in September, there were guys who had him in 6th round who now have him going number 2 overall. As great a season as he has, he won the damn Heisman. What more can you do on the collegiate level? Can you go from the 6th round to the 2nd pick in the draft in 1 year's time? Can you actually do that? Can you accomplish that? I guess anything's possible, but that seems a little bit drastic for me.
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible, right? Yeah, as an NFL draft analyst, I've learned never think you can expect what's going to happen. Never think what's going to happen. It's just, it'll always hit you with surprises, the NFL draft cycle and the NFL cycle, like how guys progress too. So you learn to stay open-minded and flexible and just kind of roll with the punches and know that there's a lot you don't know. And there's a lot of circumstances in flux too. Like if Jaden Daniels never came to LSU, there's a good chance that he doesn't rise this high because LSU afforded him the proper supporting cast and the coaching, right? So, there are so many different variables that kind of accentuate that change year over year. And as an NFL draft analyst, I think the most important thing is to understand that and be able to change with that, right? And move with that flow. So Jaden Daniels is a perfect example. And, guys like Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr., you can go down the line with the transfer quarterbacks who capitalized on that change of scenery. I think it's a common theme and, it's something that's a part of it at this point. But as an NFL draft analyst, you learn to accept that and be fluid.
That leans right into my other philosophical question at IC_draft. Make sure you follow Ian on X. Does a tremendous job for the Pro Football Network. You see, he knows the stuff. Transfer portal, man. Everybody plays in different spots. How does it make it more difficult? You kind of alluded to it there. It's just part of the process. You got to get used to it. But I mean, you mentioned Daniels, Williams, all the quarterbacks basically,
except for Drake May.
Except
He's the
for
only
Drake
one
May.
who stayed put.
Yeah, except for Drake May. I mean, how much does that make it more difficult for you when you got guys bouncing around all over the place? Not just quarterbacks either. Every single position.
Mm-hmm. I think the toughest part is recalibrating at the start of the cycle and going back because I have a 2025 watch list that has a lot of guys on it right now. And after the 2024 NFL draft, I'm going to have to go back and make sure that I've got all the right schools listed because there was so much change, right? So I think that's the toughest part of it for me. I think it's difficult because every transfer player makes that decision for different reasons. And sometimes it's not fully the right reason. Sometimes I think a lot of guys do need to change the scenery, but you don't want to move just because things aren't perfect right now. All right, I want to move. I want to be a starter, right? Sometimes you're not ready to do that. And there are some guys who do make it based on the proper merits. I want to be a starter, but where's a place where I can feel properly coached up, right? For my NFL development. So there's a lot of factors that go into all of those decisions. And for me, it's really just tracking where guys are going and then seeing what becomes of that, right, on the tape in the following year. It's a very complicated process. So for me, what I do is I just try and, understand what I can understand, control what I can control, and, list guys where they are and see what happens with those changes. But, understanding the transfer portal, again, it's a very inexact thing. It's a little chaotic right now, with a lot of the coaches. You saw Jeff Hafley going to Green Bay from Boston College because
a lot of guys bailing, a lot of guys.
I want to focus on football. Yeah. So it's a chaotic time right now. So as an NFL draft analyst, again, I know I sound like a broken record, but just understanding that, sitting back, watching, and staying open about it.
All right. I'm going to really tick off all Eagle fans on this stream here right now. I'm going to suggest that Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is taken with the 52nd pick in this draft. The Eagles draft 50th and 53rd. I am really threading the needle here that he's going to go in between the 2 picks in the second round the Eagles have. Number one, will he drop all the way to 50? Eagles' first chance to take him. If not, does he go shortly thereafter? If the Eagles get him with their second of their 2 picks, then everybody will really be happy. How do you have him rated? Where is he on your power rankings of all players, knowing full well the NFL and their feeling about off-ball linebackers and the like? Where does Jeremiah Trotter Jr. fall for you?
Yeah, so he's falling a little bit for me. I still have a top 75 grade on him. He's one of my top linebackers. It's pretty clustered together right now for me, and that's one position that I'm still kind of settling because there are a lot of questions. Peyton Wilson from NC State, I think, has the highest film grade for me, but medically, there's a lot of questions there, right? So that might have an impact. Cedric Gray from North Carolina, I like. Trevin Wallace from Kentucky, another guy I like a lot. Jeremiah Trotter is kind of in that group. I had a very high grade on him coming out in 2022. And I do think in 2023, you saw some of the traits that make him such a good prospect, like I think within the tackles, that the instincts to play blocks, right, and combat through blocks and that physicality, but then also having the explosiveness to drive on short passes and make plays, right? So I think all of those things are there. He was dealing with a hamstring injury a lot this year, and I think it did affect his mobility at times, his change of direction. So I want to see if he's fully healthy at the NFL Combine, but an instinctive 3-down defender with the coverage IQ, with the block construction. I think all of those things are there for him. So he's around that range for me. I think he would be worth one of those second round picks. If he's not there, though, I think you got guys like Trevin Wallace. You got guys like Peyton Wilson who could be there, right? Cedric Gray, I like him a lot. Junior Colson, I know, has been rising a lot. And I think when he tests, people are going to get on him even more because 6'3", 245 or so, elite size speed athlete again. So there are options for you. But if you're looking for a guy who can deconstruct blocks, play physical, has enough coverage IQ to work in space. I think the biggest question for him is the mobility issues that we saw in 2023. How much of it was injury related and how much of it was just he's a little bit muscle bound, he's a little bit stocky, or he doesn't quite have the NFL level, second level mobility. So I think we'll see some answers there at the NFL Combine, but he is within that range for me.
I see. Have a good time taking in all the Combine stuff. This is your time of year, so we're going to be calling pretty often, as a matter of fact. We appreciate you not only joining us, but getting up early to do so today. Thank you very much. Have a good time next week.
Yes, sir, Jody. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Ian. That is Ian Cummings from NFL Draft Network, NFLDraftNetwork.com. McMullen and McDonald, the Mac and Mac guys. We'll take a quick timeout. We'll break down some of the stuff that Ian said. We got our guy Paul Domowitz scheduled to join us. I think Damo went in for surgery or something like that. Torn
surgery.
Achilles. I don't know. I think
and he's coming right out.
I think he tore his Achilles raking leaves or something.
Yeah,
I don't know. He just said he had a doctor's appointment. He's going to try and be back by 9:20 to jump it up with us here on Birds 365.